Okay, here we are on the 8th of Mar Cheshbon. Ayom Yom. Ayom Yom. A long one. Okay, mitzvah, the word mitzvah, is an idiom for tzavta. You see the word tzif, the tzaddik and the beis and the tov. So mitzvah is tzavta. Tzavta means to connect. So we learn from this, connect, attach, that a mitzvah connects you, attaches you with Hashem's will. Whoever performs a mitzvah becomes joined to the essence of God. May he be blessed. It's something to ponder, right? Not just a simple action. Mitzvah loshen tzavta connects you with the essence of God, who issues that particular command. This is the meaning of, quote, the reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah itself. It achieves the connection between you and Hashem. Is becoming attached to the essence of the Ein Sof who ordained the command. That attachment is itself the reward. The above can be understood through an analogy from the physical world. An extremely simple person has an inner sense of bittul, meaning nullified himself, before the wisdom and greatness of a scholar. Right? Who am I in relation to this Talmud Chacham? That bittul, in which he senses himself to be so utterly a non-entity, keeps him at a distance from the Talmud Chacham or the rich businessman. There's a person who's poor and a person who's multi-billionaire. There's no connection. There are different ends from the financial perspective. There are different ends of the spectrum. Now, the sage, in turn, so the perspective of the poor person is, this is someone out of my league, so to speak. The sage, in turn, does not sense or perceive the simpleton as belonging at all to the category of human beings. So here he's not using rich and poor, using a Talmud Chacham and someone who's simple. So the simpleton, from the perspective of the Talmud Chacham, doesn't belong to the category of human beings. And that's crazy kind of a Talmud Chacham, because it's, when I say crazy, it exists. But we like to think of a Talmud Chacham as not just someone who knows a lot, but who also is a lot, meaning is and takes the Torah and understands the Torah and understands, because we learn Chassidus that every yid has a nefesh elokis, and therefore I could not have an attitude of pushing that person away. But there are people like that, superior in intellect, who look at someone who's not so studied and not so bright, no connection between the two. So not that the scholar dismisses or rejects him, God forbid, for that would be an evil trait, yes, as we just said. He simply sees no connection or relationship with him whatsoever. Now, we'll bring how the connection comes, how the mitzvah comes in. When the sage instructs a simple man to do something for him, i.e. Hashem tells Hashem, right, totally out of our league, so to speak, gives us instructions to do something for him, i.e. the mitzvahs, that command brings the simpleton into being. Now there's a relationship. The simpleton has a place in the mind and presence of the wise one. In his own self-perception, he is no longer, now the simple person is no longer a non-entity, but a somebody, because the highfalutin and very intelligent person, the intellectual, has reached out to the one who's not and said, I need something, I want you to do something. So he's assumed a status unto himself, this simpleton, in that he's able to carry out an order of the sage. And it is him that the sage addressed and instructed. So in the eyes of the sage too, that's from the simpleton's point of view. Now from the sage's point of view also, the simpleton now exists. He's an entity. There's an interdependence of one on the other, the commander and the commandee. The commander can't get the thing done without the commandee doing it. And the commandee doesn't do anything without the commander telling him. So there's now a relationship. So each one is now a somebody in each other's eyes. So the simpleton becomes the somebody to whom he, the sage, can speak and instruct. What is more, the command actually unites, right, this is what I've been saying, unites the lofty, exalted sage with the gross simpleton, and the analogy is obvious, right? It is understood that in the above analogy, there is no difference at all that what the command is about. This is another point. Doesn't mean what Hashem is commanding us. He says, I have singled you out and identified you as someone who can fulfill what I need to be done, which I want to be done. And it doesn't matter what that is. It doesn't matter what the command is about, whether it's washing Negelwasser or writing a Sefer Torah or learning Chassidus. This is what I want, and you're able to deliver. We now have a relationship. So it doesn't matter what the command is about, whether a great lofty matter or a simple trivial one. I can give you a simple example of this. In our office, we have a crew that comes in every once in a while, like a woman, and a couple of women who come in and clean, right? Now, there's a relationship. There are moments when there's a non-existent relationship. I'm sitting at my desk, and she's emptying wastebaskets and scrubbing the floor. But as soon as I reach out to her and engage her in, this is real everyday stuff, and a conversation, and we get on common ground, talking about our families and talking about God, right? She's a non-Jewish person, but she's a person of faith. We now have a relationship. And before that, I was sitting at my desk doing my stuff, and she was doing wastebaskets. But as soon as we engage each other at a level that we have in common, so now it's a different story. Okay. So let's engage with the loftiest of the lofty, Hashem himself, in the lowest of the low, us human beings down here on earth, through the power of the Torah. Lessons in Tanya, page 142. And Likutei Amorim, page Kuf Mem Dalid, counting from the bottom of the page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines up. Way over on the left, it starts with Vehine. We are in the middle of unpacking the language of the Zohar, which said that in the time of the Gullus, that the Amei Ha'oretz eat from the tree of good and evil. There's two trees, right? Eitz HaChaim, the tree of life, and the tree of good and evil. And the tree of good and evil was the Eitz Hadas Toivara, the tree of good and evil that we were prohibited from eating, from which we were prohibited to eat, and which we did eat, right? The first day of creation, Adam, right? And that caused a great descent. And that great descent, the understanding of what that great descent is that godliness, holiness, came down and became covered, masked over and over, until we get down to things which don't seem like they have any godliness in them at all, which is not a bad parallel with our Hayom-Yom, right? A human, as we said, who doesn't seem to have any parallel at all with the great entrepreneur or the great Talmid Chacham. Okay, and we said that the Talmid Chacham in the time of the exile, the Talmid Chacham ate from the produce of the Amei Ha'oretz, so the relationship was established between the people of the field and the Talmid Chacham. And it says in the future, that Eitz Hadas Toivara will go away, and we'll all be living from the tree of life. So he's now explaining it doesn't go away. It doesn't go away, but we understand it a little bit differently, as follows. Mihine, Malchus Datzilis, when the sphere of Malchus, the bottom sphere in the chain, right, from Chachma to Malchus, when the Malchus of the world of Atzilus, Mislabeshes Baklippus Noiga, gets enclothed in Klippus Noga, and then I said, this is the beginning of the thickening, of the darkening, of the visual disappearance of God. When I say visual, or even cerebral disappearance of God or soulful disappearance of God, because our mind is being clouded by the reality that's where God, our mind is being clouded by the fact that godliness itself is beginning to hide, is beginning not to shine. And we've explained this a few times, but just worth saying this one more time. What's that about? God is, the initial state of things is there is only God, and that's always the state. However, he wants there to be a creation. He wants ultimately for man down here to serve him. To do that, he has to conceal his allness so that division, so that multiplicity, he has to conceal his oneness so that multiplicity can emerge. And that's called the Tzimtzum. And the Tzimtzum, so it has a function in that the function is he wants multiplicity, he wants a diverse world, and ultimately this even lower world. But to do that, he has to hide himself, because if he doesn't, no worlds will exist. There will be the state that existed before the creation, which is there's only he. So there's this notion of tzimtzum, contraction. And the other language that we're using now on the page, Hashem builds, as it were, concealments over himself, which are called klippas, shells. So the Malchus of Atzilus, which is pure godliness, becomes invested in the klippas, in the shells. And these klippas noiga are light shells, meaning light can come through them. They can, or on the other hand, the way to talk about klippas noiga, they can go either way. They can be, they're thin enough so that we can erase their effect and see more godliness, erase the blocking effect or diminish the blocking effect, I'd say better, and see godliness within it. Or we can thicken it and make godliness more and more hidden. It can go either way. So this is the Eitz Abdas Toivara. This is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So it isn't just the sense like that where the knowledge of good and evil, we're sunk into it forever. No, because there's a good side to it, right? And it's part of the tree of life, because this is the way Hashem has decided to invest reality with life, but he wants to create a multiplicity of things, so he hides himself. And that concealment is called the tree of good and evil, because there's a klippa which could go either way, to the side of good or to the side of the opposite of good. Klippa's naga. And he's done this, and I'm back inside now, kedei levara hanetzoitzes, in order that we, human beings particular, all of us subject to the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noah, and us in particular subject to the 613 mitzvahs that were given to us as Jewish people, in order that we can mevar hanetzoitzes, rectify, bring the fallen sparks back to their relationship with the Father in heaven. Interesting, back to our Yom, establish common ground between us and our Father in heaven, by taking the sparks which have fallen and rectifying them, bringing them back. A simple example, instead of eating only for the schmack of eating, to be a glutton, we eat to fulfill the commandment. We eat this matzah on this holiday, and in every day we eat this way, only kosher. So that begins to create a relationship between the commanded, which is us, and the commander, which is Hashem. And that's called levar hanetzoitzes, to rectify the sparks, which fell as a result of the sin of the first man, Adam Arisha. They fell into the darkness. And this is also a rectification of what's called rectifying the broken vessels. The broken vessels refers to a state of reality that existed before the state of reality that's been spoken about in the Chumash Bereshis, where he created this and he created that. Before that, there was a previous world, which is called the world of Tohu. And in that world of Tohu, the way Kabbalah and Chassidus explain it, the light of Hashem was too great. it's hard to say this, he hadn't yet really mastered how to make it just right so that godliness could be concealed, but not that it would be so difficult that things would break, that the things would not be so hard, the vessels wouldn't be so hard that what happened in Tohu is the lights were very strong and the kalim were very small or very brittle and they broke. So all these sparks of light fell down and they're all down here in Olam Hazeh HaGashmi. They're all in the physical stuff on the principle that the higher it comes from, the lower it falls. So all the intense godliness is actually the really intense godliness that existed so-called before the creation that we know exists specifically down here in the physical. So this is the notion of taking the darkness and turning it into light, because this darkness down here is enfolded within it are the sparks that come from the highest of worlds, or the world of Tohu. And releasing them, but how do we release them? Through doing mitzvahs with the stuff instead of using it just for our own selfish benefits or lusts. That's called rectifying the sparks, which fell from Shviras HaKelim. Now back inside. Then Gam HaMalchus de Atzilus. So then what happens is that Malchus of Atzilus, of the higher world, Nikra b'Shem Eitz Hadas Tevera. When it falls, it's called now the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It's in the Klippa. It could go either way. Legabe Zod de Atzilus, in relation to the midos of Atzilus. In Atzilus, godliness is revealed. The Solim, the emanated beings of Atzilus, sense godliness because there's very little Klippa. There's very little Tzimtzum. The Tzimtzum gets greater and greater as you go down. She'enu Yored Sham, because in Atzilus, the sparks have not fallen yet so low, and they're not so distorted and in the way that they are down here, where they're distorted into what looks like physicality only. So they hadn't come down there. The Nikra Eitz HaChaim. So in Atzilus, we call it the Eitz HaChaim. So what he's doing here is rectifying our understanding of the Zohar. Eitz HaChaim is not like there's this tree and there's that tree. I mean, it's true, but Eitz HaChaim means the state of godliness where the Chayas, the true life force of everything, is revealed. And the tree of good and evil is the state of things which camouflage that reality, and things can go either way. So now we don't have them as only physical things which existed somewhere back there in the Garden of Eden. That did happen. But they're also mesholim, metaphors for us to grasp onto. There is a tree of life. Everything comes from that tree of life. The Torah is called Eitz Chaim L'machazichim Bo. It's called the tree of life to those who cling to it. If you cling to it, meaning down here in the world where there's so much brokenness, you do the things which God says, these are the things which will repair the world, tikkun olam, which is the mitzvahs, then the tree of good and evil, where you could go either way, becomes now a tree of life exposed. In other words, the life force that's in everything becomes exposed. And that's called the tree of life. By the way, I mean, if you can interrupt me, I haven't said this very much, but the reason you're on mute is just for background noise. But if you need to come off mute and ask questions, that would be fine. I don't say that too much, but I should say it more. Okay. V'hine, hislapshus hamalchus b'klippas noiga. Now when this malchus, same malchus, right? Malchus, kingship of God, godliness embedded in his role as a king who guides everything. When it comes down lower and becomes embedded in klippas noiga, so this is the Sod Galus HaShekhinah. This is what the Kabbalists call the secret of the exile of the Shekhinah. The divine presence is always divine. It's always godly. The question is to what extent is its godliness revealed, and to what extent are the klippas covering over it? And when the klippas cover over it, then it's called the Shekhinah, godliness in Galus, in exile. Which, as the Pasuk says in Koheles, one man will rule over another, which means the man of Kedusha could rule over the man of Klippa. That's rectifying it. Or, God forbid, the man of Klippa could rule over the man of Kedusha, and God disappears from the scene, and nobody talks about God, and it's sort of the state of the world in general today, godless, unfortunately. And this is what's written in the section of the Zohar called Raya Mehemna, which says, and now he quotes from the Zohar, in the time when the tree of good and evil prevails. So Enon, it says, the sages, and that's what we said, we quoted the sages will get from the Ame Ha'oretz, right? The sages will rely on the food from the field of the Ame Ha'oretz, but we're understanding this now more metaphorically. It means that in the time of Galus, the Hainu Bizman Galus, HaShechina, the divine presence, which has flowed into the externalities, into the outside, the darknesses, Shehem b'klippas noiga, which are in the klippas, the light klippa, she'erev rab yoinkim misham, which the mixed multitude eats from that way. In other words, just plain eating without any awareness or knowledge of how one is supposed to eat, and the fact that godliness is embedded in the food that we're eating. So that's called the Ama Oretz. We're not just people of the earth. We only see earthly things in an earthly way as well as, and not in a heavenly way. And it's from them, from their the squeezed essence of, that becomes food, and the Talmud Chachamim get that in Gullus. The whole world is in Gullus, right? The Talmud Chacham also is a greater awareness for sure, but until the Geula Shlema, there are blockages. There are still blockages, and it says about, Zohar says that Mashiach will come to bring tzaddikim to Shuvah. And how do you understand that? If he's a tzaddik, what does he have to do Shuvah for? Well, because there are deeper levels. Even the tzaddik doesn't see levels because it's an infinite level after level after level. And so the state of the whole world is relatively constrained and relatively hiding godliness. And that's called that even the Talmud Chachamim will be fed and get nourishment from the Ame Ha'oretz. That's the state of Gullus. And in that state of Gullus, the main service, the main work of a person, the Ikar Esek HaTorah and mitzvahs, and the main work in Torah and mitzvahs is Levada HaNetzotzos, to rectify, to free, to release those sparks. Kanedem Arizal, as is known from the Arizal. Okay, and therefore, Ikar Inyan Halima, therefore the main Indian of learning is Be'iyan Upilpul Halacha. How do we rectify the sparks? By grabbing onto the mitzvahs. The sparks are buried in the physical items which are covering over them, and the release of them is to take those physical items and use them in the way that Hashem has asked us to through His commandments. And that's done by Ian Pilpul Halacha. We have to know what the halacha is, in what's forbidden, what's permitted, what's tumah and tahir, what's unpure and pure. Levader hamuta, in order to rectify or separate out what's permissible and the pure from the opposite. And how do we do that? By concentrating, meaning delving into and really understanding the halacha. The chokhmah, bina, v'das, with one's three qualities of mind: wisdom, bina, and das. As is known, it's known that the Torah, this is expression also from the Zohar, that the Torah is rooted in, it comes from the Chokhmah of the Eibishter, and with Chokhmah it will be redeemed. In other words, change our consciousness, change the way we think, change the way we perceive things through our mind's eye by looking at things as opportunities for the release of God in every piece of food we eat, in every relationship we have, instead of looking at them through different eyes, which are the opposite of what I said. Because the Torah comes from the highest levels of God's wisdom and infuses that down here below, albeit, as we've said over and over again, it's all camouflaged, it's all hidden in the klippas. But it's all there, Chokhmah B'Tzilis, Amalubeshes B'Malchus of Atzilus, which is first enclosed in the sphere of Malchus of Atzilus, which is the Soid Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that's where the secret of the oral Torah begins. The first level that we call God speak is Malchus of Atzilus. Remember from the Zohar teaches us Malchus Peh. Malchus is the mouth. The mouth speaks. And in Atzilus, when the mouth speaks, the receiver of the speech realizes and feels, apprehends that this is God's mouth speaking. And then there's the notion of that the father is the foundation of the daughter. The father is Chokhmah, and Chokhmah streams all the way down to Malchus, which is called the daughter. This is the poetic, metaphoric language of the Zohar. And this Malchus, this oral Torah, which starts with from the mouth of God and is perceived in Atzilus as coming from God, becomes beluga enclosed the Malchus of Yetzirah. It goes down into the lower world. The Soid HaMishnayos, and that's the secret of the Mishnah. The Mishnah is the bringing it down into concrete things that we can understand, and the Baraises, which are expositions of the Torah law that come from outside the academy, as we talked about yesterday. Hamlubash b'klibas noiga, and these things, now godliness becomes enclosed as it comes down in klipas noiga. Shekeneged olam hayetzira, and that's the level of klippa, the level of blockage or concealment that exists in the world of Yetzirah. And that's where begins either das or das hora. He adds, in the parentheses, that's where there begins the knowledge of evil, because there's a covering over God. And that's the beginning of the negativity that begins as a result of Klippus Naga. Now, there's another way, the Alter Rebbe says, of looking at this, except different a little bit from the structure we just said. It's like this: the Baraises Hamalubeshes, that the Baraises which are enclosed in Klippus Naga, Shegeneged Olam Ha'asiyah. So he goes down one level. When he's down one level, it's even thicker, right? From Yetzirah to Asiyah, godliness is even more camouflaged. And he says, in other words, you could look at this in two ways from the writing of the Zohar, talking about the descent from Atzilus to Yetzirah, or the greater descent from Yetzirah to Asiyah, from Atzilus to Asiyah, as is known from the writings of the Arizal. In other words, the Arizal explains the Zohar, so that we're not left talking about there's a tree of evil and there's a tree of life, and the poor people eat from the tree of evil, and the Talmidei Chachamim eat from the tree of life. That was our simple and rather erroneous understanding until the Alter Rebbe explained it to us. Everything is a tree of life, but the differentiation between good and evil comes about as a result of the tzimtzum. And so there is now awareness that there is something good and something evil. But that awareness gives us the ability to free the evil from the good. And so we will take the gullus of the Shekhinah, the exile of Shekhinah, and bring about the geula of the Shekhinah. Crack open the egg and eat divinity, so to speak. And it's a poor muscle, but that's what came out of my mouth. Okay, any comments here, questions? You're all good? I'm taking that silence is golden. I hope that's true. Okay, then we'll see you tomorrow. Oh, by the way, we're going to have an issue. I'm having a procedure on Monday, and probably will need Tuesday. So somehow on Sunday we're going to have to do a few more days. So I'm warning you, it may be a little long on Sunday. All right, take care.